recently got my hands on an e-commerce brand that does roughly $1 million per month with Google Ads alone, and in this video, I want to show you exactly how I go about auditing any e-commerce brand that I potentially start working with and the main problems and issues I look at beforehand with brands like these. This is the brand right here. As we can see, in the last 30 days, it spent roughly $17,000 to make back around $66,000, but in average, this brand does anywhere between $80,000 to $100,000 per month. The main reason why they came to us is because their sales are starting to fluctuate a lot more. It's actually starting to go down. Now, first and foremost, before I look at any of the campaigns, before I go into the actual back end to see what kind of strategy and approach they have, I always like to start work and looking at the foundation. When it comes to the foundation, first and foremost, it's always about conversion tracking. What I like to do is I like to first start by going over to the segment column right here to conversions and conversion action, because I always want to see how many conversion tracking tags are firing for any given campaign. If there's multiple conversion tracking tags firing, that's the number one red flag that your conversion tracking is messed up. Second, if there's only one conversion tracking action firing, that's actually a good sign. But the immediate issue I see here for this brand is this brand has an external software tracking all of the data. It's a software called AdNabu. Now, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely fine to have an external software be tracking all these sales amounts, all these sales events, and so on and so forth. However, keep in mind, this is always going to be external to Google Ads, and to be on the safer side, you want to have Google's internal tracking tags also installed to ensure Google is able to track all the internal data points that these external softwares may not essentially be tracking just because of the way they were created or because of the permissions they have. So it's always safer to have that, which this brand doesn't. So what I like to do also is I like to go on over to conversion goals right here to understand what the overall numbers and metrics look like. So what I start to look at is basically if they have other conversion tracking events firing, such as add to cart, begin checkout. I like to understand if these values are going lower and lower as we go deeper in the funnel, and by how much. So if from initiate checkout, we can see it's $201,000 in revenue that was started. And then we come to add to cart, which is a little bit on the back side, it's $185,000. So essentially what should be happening is the add to cart values should generally be higher in terms of the conversion value, and then initiate checkout, it should be a little bit lower than the add to cart, simply because naturally more people will drop off from add to cart to initiate checkout. Maybe more people will add the product to cart, but then for whatever reason not move on to the checkout page. So technically this should be lower. In this situation it's not, which is kind of a sign that we need to double check conversion tracking. And then finally, if we go to the purchase revenue number right here, we can see it's 63,000, which is about a third to maybe a quarter of what the initiate checkout value is and the add to cart values, which is supposed to be where it's at. It should be 1/3 to maybe 1/4 or even 1/5 of your initiate checkout values. These conversion tracking issues is the first and foremost thing I always check. But then that brings us now to the actual campaign strategy. Now, in this situation, what we see is this brand is heavily relying on performance max campaigns. There's literally 3 performance max campaigns to 1 search, and that search is a branded search campaign. Now, first and foremost, for any campaign audit, what I'm trying to understand is what is the overall health of these PMax campaigns? Are they just limited by a bunch of policies? Do they have limited by budget, target issues, so on and so forth? In this situation, we have both of these issues going on. We have limited by policies. These asset groups have some kind of issue, and that's because this is a liquor brand, which obviously is going to have a lot of policy violations, but also it's also limited by things like the budget, by the target. The search brand campaign is limited by the bid strategy. So all these things are red flags, which essentially tell us that there needs to be a little bit of work done on the holistic approach as well. But when we deep dive a bit further into the Performance Max campaign, we understand further issues that this PMax campaign is going through in terms of the overall setup approach. And one thing I always like to do, I always like to start with the asset group section, because if you run Facebook ads, you know that within Facebook ads, you can have one campaign, and within that one campaign, you could have one ad set, which in turn has 3 ad copies or 4 ad copies. Well, the asset group section within a Performance Max, it's like the ad copy section on Facebook. This means you could have 1 asset group in here, you could have 2, 3, 5, so on and so forth, whatever your budget permits, which in this situation, when we come on over to the asset group section, first and foremost, we see that there was a total of 3 different asset groups tested. One has a lot of images, logos, videos, headlines, so on and so forth, with a lot of search themes, audience signals. The second one, which is currently paused, was a feed-only approach, meaning it was going after shopping only with no types of signals. And the third one, it looks like it's a holiday copy of some sort, going after maybe during Q4 when it was active, but it was never shut off here. So what this brand is doing is essentially it's testing based on specific occasions or specific seasons, and this is not really letting them know what's working the best versus what's not working the best. Because when you have a bunch of images, logos, headlines, etc. in here with a lot of search themes, with a lot of audience signals, number one, you force this asset group to be a jack of all trades, meaning you force it to go on YouTube, on Gmail, Discover, remarketing, discovery, along with shopping. And in this situation, if it's doing 6 different things at once, it's not a master of anything at all. But in addition to that, the main problem is we don't know if this asset group is doing well because of the search themes added in here, or is because of the audience signals, or it's because of the images and logos that are added in here. So in reality, we're kind of throwing money at Google and just hoping and praying it finds a winning approach for us, which essentially is not an efficient strategy. But in addition, they're testing the second asset group in here with completely different images, completely different logos, but at the same time, they also have different types of search themes and audience signals compared to the first one. So in that situation, you're not really A/B testing, you're just kind of throwing a bunch of different ad copies in the campaign and just hoping something works. So this is not an ideal approach. Normally, what we like to do is we like to base it based on 2 different asset group tests at any given time. So for instance, if we want to test different images, logos, videos, etc. in an asset group, we will have 2 separate asset groups in there with the same logos, videos, headlines, etc. And we might start A/B testing by only having different search themes in there. Audience signals is the same. Or we might have completely different images, videos, logos for one asset group, and the other would have something else, but the search themes and the audience signals would be the exact same. So that's the main approach, which is kind of lacking here. And obviously asset group approach is not ideal for brands like these because it's going to always be limited by policy no matter what you do, because you are selling liquor in this situation. But in addition, moving on to the product section, this is the next thing I like to normally look at. What I'm trying to understand is, number one, how many products are profitable? Number two, how many products are spending money but they're not profitable? And then number three, what products are not even getting tested? So in essence, what we're looking at is what are the products that are spending the most money and profitable. We see that the break-even ROAS for this brand is roughly a 2x, so anything above 2 is profitable. This is profitable barely, and this one is not profitable. So this is spending $300 but still no profits. This lets us know what needs to be excluded. That's what we're trying to understand, any bad products. Next, we're trying to understand what can be scaled. So these products are good, these can be scaled a bit further. We will kind of keep them in this campaign because we don't want to shut off what's already working. And third, what we're trying to understand is which products are not getting tested properly. So what we try to do is we try to look at how many products are actually eligible within this campaign, so and actually running. So we see a total of 238 products currently active in here. What we're going to do is we're going to add in one filter of clicks less than 1, because we're trying to understand which products have basically not gotten any traction. They're just sitting there. It's 20 products. It's not a lot out of 238, roughly around 8 to 9% of the product catalog, which again, it's not a bad thing. But when you check out this number and this approach on the campaign, on the accounts level, this is going to be much higher. But this basically tells us that these 20 products, they can have a potential winning product hidden in there. But if we don't test it properly, if we don't give it the right approach, then it's just going to sit here. It's not going to get any clicks. It's not going to spend any money. And it's just going to be a waste of time to even have these products within this catalog. Finally, I'm looking at the CTRs to see how many products have less than 1% CTR, because the main goal with Google is to have a CTR above 1%. That's always the go-to kind of approach. So we're trying to understand which campaigns and which products have better CTRs. We see this one has over 1%, and that's because the product image here is completely different than the other ones right here. So that tells us that, hey, this is the approach we probably need to take in terms of the product images. But these are all sorts of holistic top-level things I'm looking at, because it gives us an idea of what needs to be done for the brand. And finally, I go on over to the settings section to understand how this campaign was even set up to begin with. What I'm trying to understand is this campaign going after retargeting and cold traffic only, or is it only at one or the other? In this situation, we see this campaign is going after new customers and existing ones, which might not always be the best approach, because this means that this is going to do a lot of retargeting. It might even favor more retargeting audiences versus cold traffic, especially if you're trying to achieve certain target ROAS metrics and values. In this situation, there's no target ROAS and metrics values, so this means that there might be a little bit of a 50-50 balance between cold traffic versus retargeting, or 60-40, but we want to get this down to maybe 80-20. So the best way to do that normally is we launched separate approaches and separate strategies where it's only going after new customers. In this situation, they don't even have an existing customer list, so we can't even do that. But this is where we understand what the approach should be on the Performance Max campaign side of things. And in total, they have 3 different Performance Max campaigns. Basically, all these 3 are segregated out based on the actual purchase volume of the products and if they're profitable or not. So that's not a bad approach, but normally for a lot of the brands we work with under my agency, which, by the way, if you run a brand doing $50,000 per month or more in revenue, and you are looking to 2x, 3x, 5x your revenue with Google Ads, go onto my website at yourmarketing.com, schedule a free call with me, and let's see if we can potentially work together and make that happen. But the best approach usually is an approach of segregation, which usually falls under the TPS approach, which stands for testing, profitability, and scaling. This means products that are getting currently tested at any given time, they have their own separate approach versus products that are already profitable or products which are already scaling. This is the best approach to take normally, because this lets each product basically get different amounts of focus. This really helps separate everything out. And then finally, we have the branded search campaign here. So there's nothing really much to look at here, but what this brand is missing is diversification. Now, if you're one of my OG followers, you know that I love to have essentially a strategy where there's vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Vertical scaling is where we're increasing budgets, we're decreasing restrictions, which this brand already has taken care of. But horizontal scaling is where it's missing, which is scaling by more campaign types. Again, if you run a brand doing 50,000 or more per month in revenue and you really want to scale to multi 6, 7, 8 figures with Google Ads, go onto my website at yourmarketing.com, schedule a completely free call with me, and let's see if we can potentially work together and make that happen.